Hello, folks. Tom Reeder again. Well, Paul's been before 3 trials. He's witnessed to 3 different kings, other people, royalty within the Romans, as well as the the Jewish people. And apparently the Romans really don't want to do much with him. But they have to do, in verse 32 of chapter 26, Then said Agrippa unto Festus, This man might have been set at liberty if he had not appealed unto Caesar. And why did he appeal to Caesar? Because he would get more justice out of them than the murderous Jews, the religious leaders. And that says a lot. So we begin in verse chapter 27. And when it was determined that we should sail unto Italy, they delivered Paul and a certain other prisoner unto one named Julius, a centurion of the august band. And in entering into a ship of Alodromitum, we launched, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia, one Aristarchus, a Macedonian of the Thessalonica, being with us. And the next day we touched at Sidon, and Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go to his friends and to refresh himself. And when we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed over the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. And there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria. I'm having a hard time talking today. A ship of Alexandria sailing unto Italy, he put us thereon. And when we had sailed slowly many days, and scarce were come over against Cnidus, the wind not suffering us, we sailed under Crete over against Salmon, and hardly passing it, came unto a place which is called the Fair Havens, nigh whereunto was the city of Lycia. Now when much time was spent, and sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them, and said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the lading and the ship, but also of our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul. And because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart thence also, if by any means they might attain to Phoenicia, and there to winter, which is a haven of Crete, and lieth toward the southwest and northwest. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosening thence, they sailed close by Crete. But not long after, there arose against it a tempestuous wind called the Icrocindine. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. And running under a certain island which is called Claudia, we had much work to come by the boat. When they had taken up, they used helps undergirding the ship, fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, strike sail, and so were driven. And we, being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. On the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. But after a long abstinence, Paul stirred forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosened from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that saileth with thee. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God that it should be even as it was told me. Howbeit, we must cast upon a certain island. But when the 14th night was come, I was driven up and down Adria. About midnight, the shipmen deemed that they drew near some country, and sounded and found it 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little further, they sounded again, found it 15 fathoms. Then, fearing lest we should fall upon rocks, they cast out 4 anchors out of the stern and wished for day. And as the shipmen were about to flee off the ship, when they had let down the boat into the sea under collar, as though they would have cast anchors out of the foreship, Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, Except these abide in the ship, you cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take meat, saying, This day is the 14th day that you have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. Wherefore I pray you to eat some meat, for this is for your health, for there shall not a hair fall from the head of any of you. And when he had thus spoken, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. Then they were all of good cheer, and they also took some meat. And when we were in all in the ship 236 souls. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, cast out the wheat into the sea, and when it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with a shore, and to which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust in the ship. And when they had taken up anchors, and they committed themselves into the sea, and loosened the rudder bands, and hoisted up the mainsail to the wind, and made toward shore. And falling to a place where 2 seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the forepart stuck fast, and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broken, and the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoner, lest any of them should swim out and escape But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept him for their purpose and commanded that they could swim they that which could swim cast themselves first into the sea and get to the land, and then the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they escaped all safe to the land. Wow. Incredible story here. And when it was determined we should set sail to Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of the Augusta band. Now, depending on which commentary you look at, this guy might be from Rome who goes back and forth securing prisoners that are to be brought to Rome. It really doesn't make any difference. He's a Roman soldier. And in entering a ship of Dramatilum, we launched, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia, one Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. So they picked up somebody else. The next day, we touched at Sidon, and Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh him. Think about that. It's a Roman soldier letting Paul go to his friends to take care of his needs. The Jews definitely wouldn't do that. They'd have beat him up and probably killed him, murdered him. But this Roman soldier has a different attitude about him. So he gave him liberty to go unto his friends and refresh himself. Must have had some trust in Paul. Sure, he talked to Paul as the journey began. And when we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus because the winds were contrary. Winds can change on a sea and come from the wrong direction, then change suddenly to where the boat cannot make its destination. Verse 5, and when we sailed over the Sea of Cilicia in Pamphylia, we come to Myra, a city of Lycaria. And there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing to Italy, and he put us thereon. And when we had sailed slowly many days, and scarce were come over against Cnidus, then wind would not suffering us, we sailed unto Crete over against Solomon. I had having difficulty sailing with the winds not for them, but against them. This could be kind of scary too. Now, also, you have to remember, these sailors did this for their livelihood. They were no dummies. It wasn't the first time out for them. These are experienced sailors, and they know what they're doing. And hardly passing it, came unto a place which is called the Fair Havens. Nigh whereunto was the city of Lycia. Now much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past. Fast wasn't the day of Pentecost, but it was the Passover, when the Jews were freed. And about that time, the weather starts getting nasty in those areas for sailing. So that's what's going on here now. It's going to slow them up some. Paul admonished them and said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the letting and the ship, but also of our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul. The master and the owner could be the same thing, or it could be one is the master and the other one's the captain of the ship, the owner of the ship. But at this point in time, they're not listening to what Paul said. You ever heard? Well, of course you've heard of people that don't listen to reason. They don't listen to other people who have wisdom. They think they know what's best, when in reality, they don't. Of course, we know what the consequences is, depending on what they didn't have the right thinking. It can be very disastrous. And because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart thence also, if by any means they might attain to Phoenicia and to winter, which is a haven of Crete, and lieth toward the southwest and northwest. Okay, they can't winter in this area. So what are they going to do? They got a plan. We're going to creep along the seashore to try and get to where we want to get. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing they had obtained their purpose, loosening thence, they sailed close by Crete. So here they are. They got a nice soft wind, and they're going to sail off the shore for protection. Not too close to the rocks, but offshore to keep from getting into any winds which would take them someplace else. Isn't that the way sin does? Softly beckons us, tempts us. And before we know it, bam! It's got us. But not long, and there we see that but again, but, however, this isn't going to be what they wanted. Not long after, there arose against it a tempestuous wind called the Euroclydon. This wasn't just any wind. This was like a hurricane, something devastating that these people know about. This was what they was trying to avoid. But unfortunately, the softness of the other wind got them. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive her. So if you can't nose into the wind, then you let the wind have you, which means you're out of control. You no longer have control of what's going on in your life. When that wind catches you, suddenly like that, you're out of time. You don't have any other choices. And running under a certain island, which is called Claudia, we had much work to come by the boat. In other words, it was another boat that they were drawing behind them, that they didn't want to see it all broken up and lost, so they tried to get that boat aboard the ship. Which when they had taken up, they used helps undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into quicksand, strike sail, and so we're driven. Here's what's happening. It's getting so bad that they're afraid that the ship is going to be torn up. So they're putting straps or some type of rope, canvas, underneath the ship, trying to hold the ship together woodways as they sail. And they have another fear. Some of these places that they go, there's layers of mud with sand on top of it, which once the bow or the aft end of the ship hits, it's going to be like a trap. It's going to suck them in. The clay is just going to get around the hull of the ship and absorb it. Of course, the sand's just going to provide enough cushion for it to gently be sucked in like quicksand. So they strike sail, and so we're driven. And when we were being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. Yeah, they're not taking water on, probably. They're really hitting them waves because this is an unusual storm, remember? It's one that comes after the Passover, and the weather gets nasty. And on the third day, I like that, third day, we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. How are they going to unload the ship now? And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. I can see Paul. He didn't do this, but yeah, I told you guys this. No, you thought you had a better way of doing it. Now, these experienced sailors are believing their life is going to pass away from them. They're scared to throw over the tackle, to throw all the other things away that they're going to throw away. But, verse 21, here we got changing situations here. After long abstinence, Paul stirred forth in the midst of the men and said, Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosened from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. Verse 22, and now I exhort you to be of good cheer. Why? For there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. Why? For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar. And lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. Whoa, wait a minute. What a change in the situation. God has said to Paul that nobody is going to die. You've got to stand before Caesar. This was where he was headed the whole time in the last 3 or 4 chapters. God had given you all them that sail with you. He's given them to Paul. Wow. I guess they need to treat Paul with a little more respect at this point in time. Verse 25, Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told me. Yes, condition coming up. Howbeit, we must be cast up on a certain island. How do they know? I guess we'll find out. But when the 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in Adria, about midnight the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country, and sounded and found it 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little further, they sounded again and found it 15 fathoms. Then, fearing lest we should have fallen upon the rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern and whooshed for the day. Yeah, that's about all they can do. Hopefully slow down enough, and then daytime they can figure something else out. And as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, when they let it down, the boat into the sea under color, as though they would cast anchors out of the foreship. See how scared the sailors are? They don't want no more part of this, especially when God's brought up. Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, except these abide in the ship, you cannot be saved. Where we heard that in the past? Genesis. Noah and his family. They were the only ones besides the animals that were saved when the flood came upon this earth. Wow. Then the soldiers believed Paul. They cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take meat, saying, this day is the 14th day that you have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. Can you imagine that? Pretty weak by now. I know that if I went without food for 14 days, I would definitely be weak. Wherefore, because of this, I pray you to take some meat, for this is for your health. For there shall not a hair fall from the head of any of you. And when he had thus spoken, he took bread and gave thanks to God in presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. Then were they all of good cheer, and they also took some meat. And we were in all in the ship 216 people. Wow. Verse 38, and when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. This is the cargo now. Money being thrown out into the sea. And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves into the sea and loosened the rudder bands and hoisted up the mainsail to the wind and made toward shore. And falling to a place where 2 seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the forepart stuck fast and remained unmovable. But the hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves. Okay, here we have it. The boat's stuck this way, and the back end of the boat's being torn up by the waves. The soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. Why would they want to do this? Well, because with the Romans, if a prisoner escapes, guess whose life is responsible for it? Then the Roman soldiers would be killed. Good idea. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded they that which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to the land, and the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they all escaped, all safe to the land. Wow. Can you feel the tenseness, the emotions, the anxiety that these people have? Sometimes they don't think right. The sailors thought they would sneak out. But remember what Paul told them? All of them had to be together, or it wouldn't be as God said it. Listening to what God says sometimes is the key to doing right and the key to do wrong. Like, for instance, Saul back in Kings. He was told to go with the prophet for the sacrifice and told to wait on the prophet. But Paul got scared because of his soldiers, and the people were wanting him not to wait any longer. And Paul decided he was going to offer the sacrifice. And of course, when he started the sacrifice, guess who came along? If I'm not mistaken, it was Samuel. Wrong time, wrong moment. Saul paid for it because he lost his kingdom to David. Big cost of not listening entirely to the Lord. May the Lord have his blessing upon this word.